Mustang horse waited 10 years for his family on the spot. Then, one evening, a miracle happens. He wasn't just a horse standing by the road. He was a mystery, a monument, a living question that had no answer for 10 long years. Every morning, every evening, through storms and drought, people saw him, always in the same place, always watching the same stretch of road as if expecting something, someone. And over time, what started as curiosity turned into quiet reverence. No one really knew why he was there, but somehow. Everyone felt the weight of his weight. It began in the summer of 2014. A chestnut Mustang with a striking white blaze on his forehead appeared on the edge of a lonely stretch of road just outside the small town of Willow Creek. The first to notice him were the early morning commuters, half awake, sipping their coffee, doing double takes as they passed the lone figure standing like a statue by the old fence line. Then came the dog walkers, the joggers, the mail carrier. Word spread fast in a town where not much happened. People assumed he'd wandered off from a nearby ranch, that he'd be gone in a day or two, but days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still the horse remained. Locals started calling him Spirit, not because he was wild or feral. He wasn't. He didn't bolt at the sound of engines or run when someone passed by on foot. He just stood there, calm, watchful, never causing a problem, but never accepting anyone's approach either. If anyone got too close, he'd simply step back, not scared, just not ready. As if he was guarding something sacred that no one else could see. Some thought he was waiting for his owner. Others believed he'd escaped from a transport trailer and somehow found his way back to this exact place. But no theory ever stuck, because no one could explain why he wouldn't leave. Through bitter winters, when snow blanketed the fields and icicles formed along the barbed wire, Spirit stood by that road. Through summers so hot the asphalt shimmered and the grass turned to straw, he stood. Thunderstorms rolled in, lightning split the sky, and Spirit would find shelter beneath the same crooked oak tree near the ditch, only to return to his post when the skies cleared. He didn't wander far, didn't graze in the open pastures, didn't join the herds of wild horses that occasionally passed through. He had chosen that one spot, and he stayed. What kept him there became the quiet obsession of Willow Creek. Some residents drove by just to check on him each day. School buses slowed so children could wave. A retired teacher named Grace Simmons began leaving hay by the fence. A mechanic named Eddie started filling a water trough during dry spells. No one tried to claim him. No one called animal control. Deep down, they all felt it. Spirit wasn't lost. He wasn't abandoned. He was waiting. What's more, it wasn't just his presence that affected people. It was the way he watched the road, always facing the same direction. Eyes locked on the horizon, not scanning for food or danger like most animals would, but scanning for something else, something personal, something important, like he remembered who had driven away on that road, like he believed they would come back. As the years rolled on, Spirit became part of the town's rhythm. New families moved in and asked about the horse by the road. Longtime residents gave the same answer. He's just waiting. No one questioned it anymore. The town sheriff once said, "That horse knows exactly what he's doing, and until he's done doing it, we let him be." Children grew up with him there. Farmers nodded to him as they passed. A few folks even confessed that on hard days they drove out to the road just to see him, to be reminded of something deeper. Spirit had become more than a horse. He was a symbol of patience, of devotion, of holding on when no one else would, even if no one knew why. And still, day after day, year after year, the horse stood by the road, head lifted, ears forward, always watching. And in the silence of his wait, the whole town quietly held its breath, wondering what or who he was waiting for. Daniel Cross had driven this road a dozen times before. It was the kind of forgotten highway that cut through the heart of nowhere, a shortcut between one national park and the next, dotted with rusted fence posts, weather-beaten barns, and tumbleweeds that rolled across the cracked asphalt like they had somewhere to be. He was used to long stretches of nothing, small towns with one gas station, and a diner that hadn't updated its menu since the 70s. But this time something was different. It was subtle, like a tug in the chest you don't quite understand. He slowed his truck almost without realizing it. There, on the right side of the road, standing alone by a weathered fence post under the morning sun, was the horse. Daniel didn't know then that he'd just stumbled into a story that would consume him. At first he thought the Mustang might be injured or lost. Maybe it had escaped from a nearby pasture. But the closer he looked, the less that made sense. The horse wasn't panicked. It wasn't pacing or grazing or trying to get through the fence. It was just standing, calm, watchful, still, facing the road with such a strange intensity that Daniel felt the hair on his arms rise. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. It was purposeful, like the horse had somewhere to be, or someone it was still waiting for. He continued on his way, but the image of that horse stayed with him, burned into his mind like a photograph. A few hours later, sitting at a diner a few towns over, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling. He found himself asking the waitress if she knew about the horse on the road outside Willow Creek. Her eyebrows lifted, and a knowing smile touched her lips. "Oh, you mean Spirit?" she said, like she was talking about a neighbor. "Yeah, he's been there for years." That one sentence flipped a switch in Daniel's brain. Years. He had to know more. He stayed in town that night, then returned to the road the next morning. Sure enough, Spirit was there, in the exact same spot, standing with the same silent purpose. The town didn't just tolerate him, they revered him. Locals had long stopped questioning his presence. They'd built their routines around him. Some even credited him with giving them strength during hard times. But no one could tell Daniel where Spirit had come from, or why he'd chosen that particular stretch of road. They just knew he appeared after the summer of 2014 and had been watching the same direction ever since. Daniel's curiosity turned into obsession. He started collecting stories, knocking on doors, visiting the local library, digging through years of forgotten newspapers and town records. He scoured missing horse listings, old auction reports, and even local social media groups that hadn't been updated in years. And then he found it, tucked away in a faded July 2014 issue of the Willow Creek Gazette, barely a few lines long. "Wilson family relocates after ranch closure." It mentioned the sale of their land after years of drought and financial pressure. Stephen and Rachel Wilson, along with their 8-year-old daughter Mia, had moved out of state. But one detail stood out above the rest. The Wilsons, known locally for rescuing a young Mustang from the high plains in 2011, have rehomed their horses prior to moving. Daniel's pulse quickened. A rescued Mustang. The same year Spirit appeared. The timeline fit too perfectly to ignore. Could this horse, this sentinel on the side of the road, be the Wilsons' Mustang? The one they thought had been safely placed in a new home? The article didn't mention the horse's name, but the pieces started to come together in Daniel's mind like a jigsaw puzzle finding its corners. He knew he couldn't stop now. He tracked down the ranch property which had since been sold and developed. The house was gone, replaced by a row of prefab homes and manicured lawns. But the spot where Spirit now waited wasn't far from the old ranch exit, the exact road the Wilsons would have taken when they left town. Daniel stood there for a long time, picturing it, a family truck pulling away, a young girl looking back through the rear window, a horse standing by the fence, watching the only home it had ever known disappear behind a cloud of dust. And then, as if the weight of a decade suddenly fell into place, it hit him. Spirit hadn't just wandered to that spot. He hadn't been abandoned there. He had chosen it, because it was the last place he saw his family, because somewhere, in the deep well of memory only animals seem to understand, he believed they might come back. He had waited, day after day, year after year, through seasons and silence, 10 long years. And somehow, impossibly, he was still waiting. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. The motel room was quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears and makes every thought feel louder. The weight of what he'd uncovered settled on his chest like a stone. There was no more wondering now. He was convinced that the horse on the roadside, the one everyone called Spirit, was the Wilsons' Mustang. The same Mustang that had been rescued from the plains, nursed back to health, loved by a little girl, and left behind, only not in the way they thought. He imagined the confusion of that horse, taken to a new place by strangers, and the sheer will it must have taken to escape, to retrace some invisible thread of memory all the way back to a single fence post on a forgotten road. It was the kind of devotion you don't expect, even from a loyal dog, and yet here it was, written in hoofprints across a decade of waiting. The next morning, Daniel got in his truck and drove straight to the county clerk's office. He needed to find the Wilsons, not tomorrow, not next week, now. The property records were old, paper files stacked high in dusty drawers, but eventually he found the one he was looking for. The transfer of the Wilson Ranch in late 2014, signed over to a developer after a foreclosure sale. No forwarding address listed, no contact number, just a family who'd vanished quietly, carrying with them the weight of dreams that hadn't worked out. Most people would have stopped there, but Daniel wasn't most people. Something about this story, this horse, had sunk its teeth into his soul. He couldn't walk away now, not with Spirit still standing out there, still waiting, still hoping. He started calling local vets, feed suppliers, ranchers, anyone who might have had contact with the Wilsons in their final weeks before leaving town. Some remembered bits and pieces, others didn't remember them at all. But one woman, a retired school secretary named Mrs. Keller, recalled their daughter, Mia. "Sweet girl," she said, always talking about that horse of hers. Thunder, I think she called him. Said he followed her like a dog, like they could read each other's minds. That name, Thunder, sent a chill through Daniel. It fit. It fit. Spirit hadn't been just a Mustang. He'd been Thunder. And now, the mission was no longer about a mystery. It was about a reunion. But time was a tricky thing. 10 years had passed, people moved, names changed, and social media, as vast as it was, didn't offer easy answers. He found hundreds of Mia Wilsons, dozens who fit the age range, none who seemed right. He searched alumni pages, community forums, even local church directories. Nothing. And just when the trail began to feel cold again, something shifted. Daniel stopped at a small diner near the edge of town, more out of habit than hope, and struck up a casual conversation with the young waiter behind the counter. Just as he was paying the bill, he asked the question that had become second nature now. "You ever hear of the Wilsons? Used to live on that ranch east of town? Had a daughter named Mia." The waiter blinked, then nodded slowly. "Actually, yeah. My cousin Rachel was friends with her when they were kids. They used to ride that horse together, all the time. Said it was the smartest horse she'd ever seen." Daniel leaned in. "Do you know where she is now?" The waiter shrugged. "Rachel mentioned once that they moved out to Oregon, somewhere near Salem, I think. But we haven't talked in years. I could reach out, though, if it's important." Daniel didn't hesitate. "It's very important." That single thread unraveled into something more. 2 days later, Rachel emailed him back with a memory, a city, and a high school name. "Mia was always writing letters," she said. "When she stopped talking about Thunder, that's when I knew something bad had happened." Daniel dug deeper. He scoured yearbooks, alumni groups, and eventually found a listing. Mia Wilson, class of 2024, now attending a community college near Portland. Her contact info was protected, but he found a college newspaper article where she'd written an editorial about animal welfare. The email address was right there. His fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than he expected. What do you say to someone who thinks their horse has been gone for 10 years? How do you explain that he's been waiting by the side of a road ever since? Finally, he began typing. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It just needed to be true. "Hi, Mia. My name is Daniel Cross. I recently came across a horse near Willow Creek that I believe may have once belonged to your family. His name, if I have this right, was Thunder. He's alive. He's safe. And he's been standing in the same spot for the last 10 years, as if waiting for someone. I believe that someone is you." He hit send and stared at the screen for what felt like hours. The reply didn't come that night, or the next. He started to wonder if she'd seen it, or maybe deleted it, assuming it was a scam. But on the third day, as dusk settled over the motel parking lot, and the sky burned with the colors of a fading sun, Daniel's phone lit up. One new email. It was short, just 3 words. "Is it him?" And suddenly everything felt real. The story wasn't about a mystery anymore. It wasn't about a horse that couldn't be explained. It was about a family that didn't know they'd been waited for. It was about a girl who thought she'd lost something forever. And it was about the beginning of a miracle no one had seen coming. Mia didn't cry when she read the email, not at first. She just stared at it, reading it over and over again like her brain couldn't translate the words into reality. Thunder, alive, waiting. It didn't make sense. How could it? She was 8 years old the last time she saw him, and in the years that followed, her memories of that day had blurred into a painful haze. All she'd ever known was that he was gone. They told her he'd gone to a good home, that he was safe, that he would be happy. But she remembered the way he'd watched them drive off, the way his ears tilted, the way he didn't fight or run but just stood there, like he knew what goodbye meant, like he knew they weren't coming back. Her mother had cried the entire drive out of Wyoming. Her father had stayed silent, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him from breaking apart. The ranch was gone. The animals had been rehomed. The drought, the bills, the bank. It had all crushed them, and the last straw was letting go of the one creature Mia had loved more than anything in the world. Thunder wasn't just a horse to her. He was her anchor, her best friend, her secret keeper. He listened to everything. He stood with her when no one else understood. She used to curl up beside him in the barn when her parents argued late into the night. And now someone was saying he had waited for 10 years. The first tear slipped down her cheek when she opened the photo attached to Daniel's second message. It wasn't a fancy photo, just a single image of a chestnut Mustang standing in a patch of long grass beside an old fence line. But it was him, the white blaze on his forehead, shaped like a crooked star. The way he held his head, proud but tired, the same deep eyes that used to follow her around the yard like she was the sun and he was the shadow. He looked older, weathered, but it was Thunder. No doubt in her heart. Her breath caught in her throat as memories hit her like a flood. His warm breath in winter, the way he nickered when she whistled, how he used to nudge her pockets for treats. The ache that followed was something deeper than grief. It was the weight of a reunion she never dared to dream. She called out to her parents without even thinking. Her voice cracked with urgency. Her mom appeared first, drying her hands with a dish towel, eyebrows furrowed with worry. Her dad followed, asking what was wrong, if she was okay. Mia turned the screen toward them and simply whispered, "It's Thunder." Her mom gasped before she even saw the photo, already recognizing the name like a wound reopening. Her dad's face, usually composed and unreadable, broke the moment he saw the picture. His lips parted, his jaw clenched, and then nothing. Just silence. A silence so thick it swallowed the air in the room. They sat around the laptop for hours, talking to Daniel on speakerphone, asking questions, trying to make sense of it all. Daniel was patient, gentle. He explained how he'd found the horse, how he'd spoken to locals, how everything lined up, the timing, the location, the behavior. "He's been in the same place for 10 years, he said quietly. Never left, never chased off. People say he's just waiting. It was Mia who made the decision. She didn't ask permission. She didn't make a case. She simply said, "We're going." And her parents, still stunned and teetering on the edge of disbelief, said nothing at first. But her father eventually nodded, standing up and pulling the old suitcase from the back of the closet. Her mother began packing without a word, wiping tears from her face between folded sweaters and neatly zipped zippers. Something old and unspoken was moving through the house. Grief, guilt, hope, maybe all three. The drive from Oregon to Wyoming took nearly 20 hours. They split it across 2 days, the car heavy with anticipation. Mia barely slept. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, her hands gripping a small leather halter she'd kept since childhood, the first one Thunder ever wore. She'd hidden it in a box, unable to throw it away even after she believed he was gone. It was cracked and faded now, but it still smelled like hay and old leather, like home. She kept it on her lap the entire trip. They barely talked during the drive. No one knew what to say. The thought of what they might find, what if it wasn't him, what if he didn't remember, what if he refused to come near, sat on their shoulders like a stone. But they also didn't speak it aloud. They needed the hope too much. As they neared the familiar outskirts of Willow Creek, the landscape began to change. Golden fields stretched endlessly on both sides of the road. Weathered fences leaned into the wind. The road narrowed, curling like a ribbon through quiet farmland, and then, around a gentle bend, they saw it, the spot, the old oak tree by the ditch, the broken fence line, and him, Thunder. He was right there, standing as if he'd never moved. His head lifted slightly, ears twitching. He didn't bolt, he didn't run. He watched, just like always. The SUV slowed to a crawl, crunching gravel under the tires as it pulled to the side. For a long moment, no one moved. It was like the world had stopped spinning. Thunder didn't blink, his eyes locked on the vehicle like he'd known, somehow, that this moment would come. And inside the car, Mia's voice broke the silence. "He remembers!" The door opened slowly. Mia's hand trembled as she reached for the handle, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. She stepped out, her boots hitting the dirt like she'd walked back into a dream she wasn't sure she was ready to relive. For a split second she was frozen in place, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, because what if he turned away? What if, after all this time, he didn't recognize her? What if the Thunder she knew was buried beneath 10 years of wind and dust and memories that only mattered to her? But then he moved. Thunder turned his head, slow and deliberate, like someone stirring from a deep sleep. His ears swiveled forward, his gaze fixed on her. Not just on the SUV or the sound of the engine, but her. The girl he'd once followed through fields, the girl who had fallen asleep against his side in the barn, who had brushed his coat until it shone and fed him apples and told him secrets she never shared with anyone else. His body remained still, but something in his stance changed, something in his posture, the way his breath caught, the way his head lifted just a little higher. A flicker of recognition danced across his eyes like sunlight through the trees. Mia stepped closer. Her parents stayed by the car, silent, afraid to disrupt whatever was unfolding. It was as if time had cracked open and allowed something sacred to slip through. Mia took slow, careful steps, closing the space between them one breath at a time. Thunder didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He watched her with a stillness that wasn't fear, but focus. The kind of unwavering attention that only comes from knowing someone, not just remembering their shape or scent, but feeling them as if they lived in the deepest part of your memory. She stopped about 10 feet away. Her voice barely carried, but the words found their way. "Hey, boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's me." Thunder's nostrils flared. His chest rose and fell. The wind caught his mane, lifting it gently, like fingers combing through it from long ago. Mia reached slowly into her coat pocket and pulled out the halter. It was cracked and faded, frayed along the edges, but it still held the shape of those early years. The smell of barn dust, old oats, and soft leather clung to it. She held it out in front of her, her hand steady now. Her eyes never left his. "Do you remember this?" she said. "You used to nuzzle it when you knew we were going riding. I kept it all this time. I couldn't let it go." Thunder took one step forward. It wasn't fast. It wasn't sudden. It was deliberate, almost reverent, like he was measuring each step against the weight of time. Another step, then another. Mia's breath caught in her throat as the distance closed. She stayed still, let him decide, and when he reached her, He didn't sniff the halter first. He didn't lower his head or test the air. He looked straight into her eyes. Then he did something that shattered every wall she'd built in the last 10 years. He lowered his head and pressed his forehead against her chest. It was gentle, careful, like he wasn't just recognizing her. He was forgiving her, for leaving, for disappearing, for not knowing. Mia dropped the halter and wrapped her arms around his neck, her body shaking with sobs that came from a place deeper than grief. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was release. It was coming home to something you thought you'd lost forever and realizing it had been waiting for you the whole time. Behind her, she heard her mother crying. Her father had his hand over his mouth, eyes glassy, shoulders trembling. But none of that mattered right now. The world could have fallen apart around them, and Mia wouldn't have moved. Thunder was here, real, warm, breathing, and with every soft huff of his breath against her cheek, he told her the only thing that mattered: "I didn't forget you." The moment stretched, long and unbroken, like time had bent around them. Eventually, Thunder lifted his head slightly, nudging her shoulder, nudging her hand. She laughed through the tears, brushing his coat, murmuring all the names she used to call him. "Thunderman," she whispered, "my sweet boy, my brave boy, you waited, you really waited." He leaned into her touch, his body relaxing for the first time, as if 10 years of tension had melted away in a single embrace. Then came the test. Her father stepped forward, hesitant. "Hey there, fella," he said softly. "You remember me too?" Thunder turned, ears flicking at the familiar voice. For a moment he hesitated. Then he stepped toward Stephen and gently nudged his shoulder. Stephen let out a shaky breath and placed his hand on the horse's neck. "You're still strong," he murmured, his voice cracking. "Still stubborn, too." Carolyn came next, her movements slow and unsure. Thunder stepped to meet her, lowering his head to her chest. She pressed her hand over his forehead and whispered, "I'm sorry. I thought you were safe. We never knew." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of guilt. They were something else, something older and deeper. Thunder hadn't just been waiting for Mia. He'd been waiting for all of them. And now, at last, they were here. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the fields in gold. Thunder stood surrounded by the family he had never given up on. For the first time in a decade, he didn't look at the road. He didn't stare into the distance, waiting for something to come. He stayed focused on them, ears relaxed, eyes soft. The vigil was over, the wait had ended, and in the quiet that followed, nothing needed to be said. They all understood. He had waited for love, and love had found its way back. They stayed there for hours, just the four of them and the fading sun, like the moment had to be stretched as far as it could go, afraid that if they moved too quickly, it might all vanish like a dream. Thunder stayed close to Mia's side, following her every movement with the quiet attention of someone who had waited far too long to look away. He grazed a little, sniffed at her shoes like he remembered the scent from childhood, then would look back at her as if to say, "You're real, you're really here." The reunion was more than just emotional. It was physical. Their bodies moved around each other with an ease that no time could erase. She touched him like she never stopped. He responded like she'd never left. There was no fear, no flinching, not even hesitation. It was as if the decade between them had folded into a single breath. But with the joy came questions. Daniel had returned by then, watching from a respectful distance as the reunion unfolded, and eventually he approached gently. "I don't mean to interrupt," he said, voice low, "but we'll have to decide what comes next. Thunder's been out here for a long time. He's never been caught, never penned in. Bringing him home might not be as easy as putting him in a trailer." The reality hung in the air like a cold wind, because as much as this was a miracle, it was also fragile. Thunder had lived free, untouchable, independent, watching the road from a place no one could coax him away from. He hadn't allowed anyone to get close. Not until today. Stephen nodded, glancing toward the oak tree under which Thunder sometimes stood during storms. "We can't just force him," he said. "That's not how he works. He trusted us once, and now we have to earn that trust again." Mia's expression was determined. "I'll stay," she said quickly, "as long as it takes. I'm not leaving him again." Her mother started to respond, hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We'll figure it out, together." The people of Willow Creek had already begun to notice the change. Word spread fast in small towns, and the story of Thunder's family returning traveled faster than the wind that whipped through the prairie grass. The next morning, when they drove out to the same spot, a small group of locals had gathered. Ruth, the store owner who'd been leaving hay for years. Tom, the rancher who once tried to coax Thunder into a corral with no luck. Even Sheriff Elliott, who had turned away animal control more than once with the simple words, "He's not lost, he's just not done waiting." They didn't crowd Mia or her family. They stayed back, watching with quiet reverence. Ruth stepped forward finally, holding out a thermos of coffee to Stephen, who accepted it with tired hands and a grateful nod. "Looks like he got what he was waiting for," she said, her voice soft, almost reverent. "Took 10 years, but he never stopped believing." Then she looked at Mia and added, "Neither did you, I think." It was clear by midday that Thunder wasn't going to wander off again. He stayed close, walking with Mia along the fence line, following her movements, pausing when she paused. But he wouldn't cross the ditch to the trailer they had brought, not even when the ramp was lined with apples and hay. He approached, sniffed, looked, but always turned away. Mia didn't try to force him. She just sat by the trailer waiting. She talked to him like she used to, her voice quiet, filled with old stories and fresh promises. "We'll go when you're ready," she told him, "not a minute before." They set up a small corral near the spot, not to trap him, but to give him a familiar space. The town pitched in, lending fence panels, buckets, feed, and even old blankets. It was like everyone felt they owed him something, for his patience, for his faith, for the strange comfort he had brought just by existing, day after day, through heat and rain and snow, like a monument to something purer than logic. The corral stayed open at one end. Thunder came and went as he pleased. Some nights he laid down beside it. Some nights he stood beneath the tree. But always he kept Mia in sight, and Mia kept a vigil of her own. She slept in the truck. She rose before the sun. She brushed him every morning, even when he resisted at first, even when his coat was rough from years of wind and grit. Bit by bit he softened. His eyes grew warmer, his steps more relaxed. One morning she walked up, holding his old halter in one hand, not expecting anything. She didn't even reach to put it on him. She just stood there, letting it hang. And to her surprise, Thunder lowered his head and nudged it gently. Stephen approached cautiously, heart pounding. "You think he's ready?" Mia nodded, not with certainty, but with hope. "I think he wants to come home." It took another full day, but that evening, as the sun dropped low and the shadows stretched long across the field, Thunder stepped onto the trailer ramp. He hesitated at the top, looked out toward the road, his road, the place where he'd stood for so long, watching, waiting. He blinked slowly, one last look. Then he stepped inside. Mia burst into tears. Her mother held her tightly. Even Stephen turned away to wipe his eyes. Daniel stood off to the side, stunned, humbled, like he was witnessing something he hadn't fully believed could happen. And Ruth, hands clasped in front of her chest, whispered, "He's finally going home." As they drove away, the trailer rumbling behind them, Thunder didn't panic. He didn't pace. He simply stood still, his ears flicking, his eyes calm. The road that had taken his family away 10 years ago now carried them back to him. And in the quiet hum of tires over dirt, in the glow of dusk through the windows, a family once broken found itself whole again. Not because time healed everything, but because love had waited long enough to bring them back. The drive back to the new ranch wasn't long, but it felt sacred. No one said much. The silence inside the SUV was warm, thoughtful, almost reverent. Every few minutes, Mia would glance back toward the trailer through the rear window, heart hammering each time just to see if he was still calm, still steady. And he was. Thunder stood quietly, head low, balanced, almost like he'd known this ride was coming all along. There was no panic, no stomping hooves, no sharp turns or kicks. Just peace. A deep, unwavering calm that radiated from him like he finally understood that the journey was ending, or maybe that it was just beginning. When they pulled into the driveway of the modest ranch house, the sun had dipped low enough that the sky was bathed in copper and pink, the air soft with that cool prairie scent of grass and dust and distant wood smoke. This wasn't the old ranch from Mia's childhood, wasn't the sprawling acres with white fences and big red barns, but it was home. It was enough, a place they'd rented for now, with a 2-stall barn out back, a wide paddock, and a pasture that stretched just far enough to make the horizon feel close again. The new start, the second chance, the place Thunder would finally rest. Stephen parked the trailer slowly, lining it up alongside the small barn, then turned the ignition off with a long exhale. Nobody moved right away. Mia looked over at her parents, eyes shining, fingers wrapped around the halter resting in her lap. Her mom smiled gently and gave her hand a squeeze. "Ready when you are," she whispered. Mia stepped out and walked toward the trailer ramp with steady steps, her boots brushing the gravel with quiet confidence. She didn't say anything as she unlatched the gate and slowly lowered it, letting it creak gently to the ground. A breath of fresh air rushed in, and Thunder's ears twitched at the sound. She waited, gave him a moment, then took a step back, giving him space to decide. And he did. Thunder moved slowly, stepping onto the ramp with the same patience he had shown on the road, scanning the space, taking in the new sights and smells, the barn, the breeze, the familiar voices. Then he stepped fully out, his hooves touching the earth of his new home for the first time. He stood there, his chestnut coat glowing in the sunset, mane tousled from the wind, eyes focused not on the barn or the land, but on Mia. She approached, halter in hand. No rush, no commands, just presence. She reached out slowly, and for the first time in 10 years, she slipped the halter over his head, fastening it like it had never been removed. He didn't flinch, he didn't resist. He stood still, breathing deeply, as if this, finally, was right. They walked together toward the paddock, and it wasn't just a walk, it was a procession. Her father opened the gate, Thunder stepped through, and once he was inside, Mia unclipped the lead and let him go. But he didn't run. He didn't pace the fence or try to find a way out. Instead, he turned to face them, head high, ears relaxed, and then he began to graze. It was so ordinary, so beautifully normal, the kind of thing horses do without thought. But this time, it meant everything. It meant safety, trust, surrender. It meant that he had decided to stay. They stood watching him until the sky faded into a deep indigo. Thunder moved slowly across the paddock, finding a spot near the edge where the grass was thick, and eventually he laid down, not out of exhaustion, but in comfort. A horse doesn't lay down unless they feel safe. That moment brought more tears than the reunion itself. Mia pressed her face into her mom's shoulder, and her dad wrapped his arms around both of them. For 10 years they'd lived with the weight of wondering where he went, if he was okay, if he even remembered, and now here he was, safe, home, loved. The next morning Mia woke before the sun. She slipped on her boots and jacket and stepped outside, the sky still navy blue, the air crisp and clean. She walked quietly to the paddock, heart thudding with a strange nervousness. What if it had all been a dream? What if he had wandered away in the night? But no, there he was. Thunder stood beneath the lone tree in the corner of the field, his body silhouetted against the lightening sky. And when she whistled softly, he lifted his head, ears perking at the sound, and came to her. Day after day, the bond grew stronger. She brushed him daily, brought fresh hay, introduced him to his new stall, walked him gently around the pasture. He never tried to run, never tested the fence. He simply accepted the rhythm, like he had been waiting not just for the people, but for the peace that came with belonging again. News spread quickly through town, and neighbors stopped by with quiet curiosity. No one made a fuss, no one brought cameras, just respect. People brought apples and carrots. One elderly woman brought an old photo of Thunder from years ago when he'd first appeared on the roadside. "He's been part of our lives longer than some people I know," she said, voice trembling, "and he's never asked for a thing, except for you." She looked at Mia with a soft smile. "He waited for you." One afternoon, the local vet, Dr. Ellen Ramos, came by to check on him. She'd heard the stories and offered to do a full wellness check at no cost. Thunder was calm through it all, heart strong, lungs clear, teeth worn but healthy. A little leaner than he once was, a few scars along his flank, but nothing unexpected for a horse who had spent 10 years in the wild. "He's remarkable," Dr. Ramos said as she packed up her bag. "Most horses don't survive one winter out here. He survived 10. And he's still trusting. That's not something you can teach. That's love." Mia spent the evening sitting outside the paddock, reading aloud to him like she used to. She'd always believed horses could feel stories, even if they didn't understand the words. Thunder would stand nearby, ears twitching as she spoke. Sometimes he would wander over and nudge her hand, asking for another scratch behind the ear. It was simple, gentle, healing. And yet, underneath the peace, they all knew something bigger had happened. Not just a reunion, not just a homecoming, but a lesson. Thunder's decade of waiting had shown the entire town what loyalty looked like, what patience could become when rooted in love, and what happens when you don't give up on the ones who matter. He hadn't waited for safety, or comfort, or even survival. He had waited for them, and now that he had them again, he asked for nothing else, just to be near, just to share quiet mornings and soft twilight hours, just to live the rest of his days in the presence of the people he had never once stopped believing would return. Thunder's vigil was over, but the bond he reignited was just beginning. The day of the celebration dawned with a stillness that felt meaningful, like even the air itself had paused to honor what was coming. The sky stretched wide and unbroken, painted in pale pinks and quiet golds, and the breeze that drifted through the ranch was soft, carrying the scent of early summer wildflowers and sun-warmed grass. It had been exactly 1 year since Thunder came home, and everything about the day felt touched by memory, like the land itself remembered the moment his hooves touched this soil again. The Reynolds family had spent the entire week preparing, not just for the celebration, but to mark a transformation that was far bigger than anyone had expected. Mia stood in the paddock at dawn, leaning against the fence, watching Thunder as he grazed beneath the same tree he had laid under the night he first arrived. His coat shone with a richness that came from care, routine, and the simple joy of belonging. The scars along his flank were still there, like faint stories pressed into his hide, but they had softened, like even they had begun to heal in the light of this new life. Every morning for the past year, Mia had woken before the sun and greeted him with the same soft whistle, and every morning Thunder had responded, not because he was trained, not because he was expected to, but because he wanted to. That kind of bond didn't fade with time, it only deepened. Today wasn't just a celebration of his return, it was a reflection of everything that had rippled outward since that day. People from the town, many who had watched him silently for years, leaving hay and water near the road, never trying to interfere, had become part of something bigger. They helped repair the old barn. They painted the fences. A retired carpenter had donated time and tools to build new stalls. One family donated a water trough. Another had simply come by every Saturday with fresh apples. Thunder wasn't just a horse anymore. He was a part of them. By mid-morning, the ranch began to fill with quiet chatter, the sound of gravel crunching under tires, boots thudding gently on the earth, soft laughter and greetings exchanged in low, reverent tones. No one arrived loudly. No one acted like this was a party. It wasn't. It was a reunion, an offering of gratitude to a horse who had waited when everyone else would have moved on. Tables were set up near the fence line, covered in handmade quilts and wildflower arrangements. Someone brought a framed photograph of Thunder from years ago, standing solemn and alone on that windswept roadside, eyes fixed on the horizon. Another brought a copy of the article that had first told his story, now yellowing slightly at the edges. A child carried a drawing she had made of Thunder with a star above his head and the words, "The horse who loved." Mia walked among them, humbled. She wasn't a child anymore. That had changed the moment she laid her hands on Thunder's face again, the moment his breath touched her skin and erased a decade of distance. She had found a purpose in that reunion, not just to care for him, but to give voice to the loyalty he had shown when no one was looking. She had started writing letters, then essays, then a blog that gained unexpected traction. Readers from all over the country wrote in. Some shared stories of animals they had lost and found. Others confessed that Thunder's story had reminded them to reach out to someone they hadn't spoken to in years. There was something universal in what he'd done, something quietly miraculous, the kind of love that demanded nothing in return, but waited anyway. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Holden stood beside a small wooden podium and looked out over the crowd. He wasn't one for speeches, but today he tried. "You all know this horse," he said. "You've passed him 100 times, standing there like a ghost with a mission, and maybe we all had our theories, where he came from, what he was doing. But the truth is, we didn't need to know. We could feel it. We could see it in the way he stood. He wasn't wandering. He was waiting. And not for food, not for shelter, but for them." He nodded toward Mia and her parents, who stood together at the edge of the paddock, hands entwined. And that's what makes this more than a story. It makes it a lesson, about devotion, about time, about how some bonds can't be broken, no matter how long the road gets. We're lucky we got to witness it. As he stepped away, the silence that followed wasn't awkward or uncertain. It was thick with meaning. Then Ruth Morgan, who had first started leaving hay for Thunder when he showed up all those years ago, made her way forward. She placed a hand on the paddock fence and looked at Thunder, who had approached and now stood close, ears pricked forward, calm and still. "I used to wonder what he was looking for," she said, her voice gentle with age. "And now I know. He was looking for his girl, the one who used to sing to him, who brushed his coat until it gleamed, who never knew he was still waiting. He found her again, and in doing that, he reminded all of us that love doesn't have an expiration date. It just keeps going until it finds its way back." That night, as dusk settled across the ranch and the celebration gave way to soft farewells and quiet hugs, Mia stayed by Thunder's side long after the others had left. She leaned into him, forehead resting gently against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of hay, earth, and the faint sweetness of apple from the treat she had given him earlier. The stars came out slowly, one by one, until the sky was dusted with light. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Everything had already been said, and Thunder, as always, didn't need words to understand. He simply stood there, solid and silent and sure, like he always had. Like the years on the roadside hadn't been a sacrifice, but a promise fulfilled, a promise that said, "I'll be here, no matter how long it takes." Mia whispered one last thing before she turned in for the night, her voice barely louder than the wind in the grass. "You waited for me. Now I'll never leave you." And Thunder, eyes soft, ears flicking toward her voice, stayed beside the fence long after she walked away, watching the house, the yard, the moonlit path. Not because he was waiting anymore, but because he finally could rest, knowing the wait had brought him exactly where he was meant to be. Home forever.